Hello, so welcome to my video. Please do like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. As long as you have notifications on, you will get notified when I release videos, and I do release them relatively frequently. So I can't believe we're in December, and I wanted to talk to you today really about where I'm up to, because for the whole of this year I have been talking to you about the development of this body of work, about my local landscapes, ready for an exhibition which is looming now, early spring next year in 2022, very beginning of March. And so we're now in the very last month of the year. And obviously if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I've been developing different groups of work, and I've been doing it relatively sequential. I started doing groups 2 at a time, and that was quite tricky, so I started doing it 1 at a time, pretty much anyway. And I've been showing you the process of that evolution, things that have been working, things that haven't, how I've been trying to kind of get around that as ways really for us to all think about how we develop this type of work. And I hope that's been really helpful. But what I wanted to do today was to say, okay, where am I at? And I have taken the approach of splitting my work, because I had an aim of about 30 or so paintings at the beginning of the year for this exhibition. So I've had a way of splitting it up so that I didn't get completely overwhelmed with the enormity of it really. And so to an extent, I've been looking at the seasons, and to an extent I've been working with different groups of things that I'm interested in. So just as a reminder, I've been looking at the moorland in the winter, in the first instance, beginning of the year, and also came back to it to look at it in the context of the heather moors. So that was my dip into the moors. And then with the woodland, I did a whole group about the spring woodland and that early spring, the feel of the woods at that point in time. And then I've done a smaller group of work about the autumn woods and that real rich colour and extravagance at the end of the sort of season really, at the end of the summer as it goes into winter. You've got that stunning sort of colour extravaganza with all things going on. So I looked at those. And then I've had my edgelands group, which you'd be well familiar with, and you can see, I'll put into the notes some links. So if you haven't seen some of the edgelands work, I can share that. And so now in December, I am working on my last group of works. And that group is all about the panoramic view that I have very close to where I live, because I live and have my studio in this town Mosley, which is in the northwest of England, with views of Saddleworth Moors. And so this last group is about that panoramic. And I have a location that I go to that is very local to where I live, that I walk to, and I can go down into that landscape, and as well as have these wonderful panoramic views. So it kind of is a view that shares all the different things I've been looking at really, the woodland, the moorland, the valleys in between, the field patterns, the edgelands and so on. And it's that group that I'm now starting to work on. And so really what I wanted to talk about today was how we as artists keep the momentum up when it's a difficult time of year. As you can see my hat, it's absolutely freezing cold in the studio now, and I have small heaters, but really it's very chilly. So that's one thing. The light is quite difficult because it's quite blue light, and there's not anywhere near as much light. So that's another thing. And of course, having spent a whole year, as we all have, in the throes of pandemic, trying to keep things going, there's a sort of a sense of tiredness and, you know, pretty much for me actually exhaustion. And there's been a lot of things that have happened this year that have really thrown my practice as well. So what I really wanted to focus on is how do we keep going? How do we give ourselves that oomph? And to share with you where I'm at with how I arrange my studio and how I've got started in the context of keeping things going, really. So what I wanted to just say, and what I will do in a minute is I'll turn the camera around and I'll give you a little bit of a tour around this small area of my studio that I work in, so you can see the sort of inspiration on the walls and what I've been doing. And what I'm just going to mention before I do that is that one of the things I was aware of quite a few months ago was that this was going to be a tricky time. I was going to be coming towards the end, hopefully. I was hoping to be at this point in time. I was hoping to be on my last group. And I had this sense that I really needed a little bit of something to help me. And of course, there's lots of things that we can do. We can, meditate, we can do these different things. But I wanted something that would bring me maybe together with a group of artists that were perhaps having the same feelings. And so what I did over the last couple of weeks was I took part in something called Paint Fit, which is an Emily Ball course. Emily Ball Studios. Emily Ball is a tutor that teaches out of Seawhite of Brighton down in the south of England in Sussex, but she also has a big online course portfolio now as a result of the pandemic. And one of the things that she has been offering this year is this thing called Paint Fit. So it's 2 weeks, you're in your studio, other people are in their studios that are also taking part on a Zoom call. Emily's in her studio, and the whole idea is that you have an hour or so each day, each morning for 2 weeks, with sort of stimulation of how you get going in your studio, keeping the energy up, but helping you push the work. I think I'll start this way around, and so I can share with you some of the studies that I did as part of the course I was just mentioning, which was, by the way, excellent. I didn't mention that. But you'll probably have seen me do quite a lot of small studies in the past to really help me sort of freewheel and understand a little bit, unpick a little bit of what it is, what marks are in my landscape or my subject matter. Playing around with arranging those marks and feeling my way through those landscapes in my head, if you like. And so those small studies there are part of that, and I've done some more over there. So they're the sort of thing that can really, I think, really help, and they're really good warm-up exercises. So coming into the studio, thinking about, just having small little pieces of paper helps in itself. Keeping a limit of time helps because it stops you getting too much into your own head. So I find that doing those sorts of things really helps me. These things hanging up here were done very, very quickly over a couple of minutes, just looking at two different marks that I make a lot associated with my landscape panoramic. And so that blue line, that wiggly line, is something that I do quite a bit in my studies, and you'll have seen them in my monthly mark making, and also that sort of volume of I think there it's purple, there it's more of a yellow. And so there's a whole range of those types of studies, quick studies, getting my head around using those motifs, if you like, in different ways. And then that scratchy line that I do with twigs is another thing. I like the linear lines, but I like to keep them loose and scratchy and organic, and that's what those are. So if I come round here, I've got some studies in the top right, and those are useful because those were done as part of an exercise, again on the course, which was a taped exercise. So when you take the tape off, you don't really know necessarily where things are relative to the edge because the tape is there. And it kind of helps you to be a little bit less. We all fall into this trap of arranging things in very neat ways and ordered ways, and it doesn't necessarily give us the feel of energy and oomph that we need in our work. So these have things hanging off the edge, coming in from the edge, and use the space possibly in a more effective way than if we're overthinking it. Those studies there you've probably seen before. They're part of the work I was studying as I started studying this landscape and producing very simple drawings. So I won't go into those, but this was another thing where I was actually thinking about, this was actually a reformatted collage piece, but again, just a study to get me my mind working about the landscape and using different tools. Because one of the things that's really important is that, you know, if you're not careful, we all fall into this trap of we end up with our own. So I end up with very Liz-like marks. And I need to keep trying to push that and challenge it and come up with different marks. And one way of doing that is obviously to use different tools. So this was done with different tools. This was done with, I used cling film on this. I was using a scrubbing brush to create these lines here, dragging that across. So that's quite interesting. So I might well incorporate those types of marks into my work. These are just more studies along here, not paintings, they're just studies to get me thinking about how I'm using the marks and how I can overlap the marks and use them most effectively. And then I write things. So one thing I wanted to just mention is obviously, you know, through all these explorations and studies and warm-ups and things, what we're really trying to grapple with, and through the paintings themselves, is what it is we're wanting to convey in our landscapes, in our paintings, what it is that we want to say about the subject matter, what it is that intrigues us about the subject matter, and what it is that we want to explore in the paintings. And this go between the drawings and studies, the paintings themselves, the writing, and all these different tasks is to unravel that really, and to explore what it is that you're, you know, interested in particularly, and to kind of try and convey that in the work. And it's an ongoing conversation really, and this is where the conversation with the work comes in. You have to at some point let the painting help you, and if you can think of it as a friend, that's what this idea of this friend is, then you can have that dialogue and feel that you are working together with the painting rather than doing something to the painting. Because I kind of, having had the experience of the year, I'm really starting to understand that now. And yes, you can produce paintings where you just do what you want to do, or do what your logic brain wants you to do. But if you can get into this space of just going with the flow a little bit and letting the painting talk to you and working with the painting, then I think that possibly leads to some much more interesting work. So I'll twiddle around now. These are just behind the board here. I've got some studies on the wall that were very simply done on location, but the reason I keep them there is because they are reminiscent. They have the marks that I want to include that are very, you know, distinctive for me and very much part of that landscape. And that bottom one is very much about the rhododendrons coming down the banks, which are kind of, again, is the link to the heather. And then that was me using different tools on the bottom. So lots of different studies. And the other thing I wanted to say to you was, and then if I just go over here, I can just show you that panoramic view and some of those are the original works and original studies. And I think one thing I wanted to just mention was that what I think is really useful is to constantly keep re-looking at the walls and then taking away what is no longer useful and keep refreshing. So you're constant, it's a bit like a compost heap, you're constantly turning, refreshing, taking things away that no longer serve you, moving things on. So that's all very helpful. And then just on the board, I've got a fresh piece of paper because I'm going to do a warm-up to mark making before I start on my painting. And these here, this is just another study where I've stuck a piece of collage down that was from some mark making and then tried to connect that into the rest of the page. So they're just, you know, studies. But this idea of warming up always before the painting is a really good one. And now what I'm going to just do to end with is I'm just going to share with you how I'm getting started with the paintings. So I'm going to come over here. One thing I forgot to mention is colour studies. So I started with colour studies that were based out in the landscape. And one thing I've done here is and I did these a while back, and now I'm revisiting that and then connecting back into that, but being quite selective. One thing I do is I describe the colour and then I paint it. So dandelion sunshine, mossy acid yellow, bloodgood burgundy. Bloodgood is the name of a maple that I know. So anyway, sorry, I'm twisting the camera in a strange way. So just using names to help me create the colour really. That one right at the bottom there is a purple brown heather. So and then I've used that as a sort of start point for my colours. And then if I just whiz around here, my wonderful paint wall, this is the start point of a painting, and it's very muddy at the moment, but what I was pleased about was that I really started with a lot of mark making and really using the energy from, you know, from warming up to, and just letting it go, not having a scene in mind, not trying to force a view, but just working with it. And that's only just the second layer, and there'll be many more layers. So that's an interesting kind of start point really. And you can see the drips of the year down the wall, and my palette, which is actually come from what I just showed you in my notebook. And then if I just whiz around so that you can see the studio and see over here, I'm also working in different canvases. I'm working on some boards, and I'm using the line studies to start working on these by putting collage down as a start point. And so far I've done 2, and I'll do quite a few more. And I'm just using my own papers that I've made, newspaper, coloured papers, wallpaper, all sorts of things, but trying to keep the paper thin, because what I find is that when I use thick paper it doesn't really work very well. And these are MDF boards because I wanted to have long ones and I couldn't get cradle panels in that shape. So they're MDF, and they're 56 by about 28 centimetres. So not too huge, but relatively heavy, and they will be cradle framed if they work out. And one thing I should just say is that, you know, who knows what will happen with this group. It's the last group, there's quite a lot of pressure building up, so we'll see how I get on with it. Anyway, hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into the work that I'm doing, and also given you some food for thought for your own practice. So thanks very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.